Star Trek Elite Force is generally regarded as the first good Star Trek game. That should come as something of a surprise since there are over 100 Star Trek games altogether. For what is one of the largest licensed brands in all of gaming and one of the largest franchises period, coming in just a few games behind Mario, it is surprising, at least to me, that there's really no defining Star Trek experience. No game everyone agrees is good. Elite Force might just be the one that most people agree on, though today it has been forgotten. I had never played Elite Force, so I was able to view it through fresh eyes without any sort of recency bias. This game takes place in the Voyager era, and if you're not a Star Trek fan, that is the 5th show coming after the original series in the 60s, the animated series that I had no idea existed, Deep Space Nine, and The Next Generation. My dad was a huge fan of TNG, and I've spent many an afternoon falling asleep on my couch with a marathon of Picard playing on the TV. So Voyager isn't really something that I'm super familiar with or even particularly interested in, but I'm enough of a Trekkie to understand any references and kind of get along as best as you can. I actually know more about Star Trek than the average person, probably, and I'm suddenly realizing it as I say these words. Typically, a Star Trek game seems to consist of spaceship simulators. You get to be the captain and direct the ship, essentially, not really as a group of people, but a hero unit. The RTSs have you building ships. The VR game has you manning the bridge as crew. Generally speaking, you don't really get to explore and experience the world as a red shirt. I mean, it's pretty unlikely that most people on the ship ever talk to the captain or see the bridge. And one of the coolest parts about Elite Force is the experience as you roam the ship. You're not bridge crew, you're just a crew member, and you're not even in charge of your own team. You take orders. The game opens up with a pretty standard combat situation. You shoot a few baddies, and then it really opens up and lets you begin to explore the ship. This game came out in 2000, so this would be up against games like Deus Ex and Metal Gear Solid, and quite frankly, I think it looks pretty good. The lip sync is obviously not really there, but I can't think of any game that had great lip sync at the time. The models are blocky but well textured. The colors are authentic but tend to be a bit samey and muddy. It's sometimes hard to see things you can interact with versus background textures, but ultimately that doesn't really slow down the game. Speed is thoroughly attainable here, the game being built on the Quake 3 Arena engine id Tech 3. That same engine also powered Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, Resident Evil Dead Aim, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and the Star Wars Jedi Knight games, and it feels pretty good here. Elite Force was actually one of the first games to ever use id Tech 3, and that's because it was developed by Raven Software, an Activision-owned developer that worked on a lot of id games. In fact, Raven and id were at one point literal neighbors down the street from each other, and Raven ended up working on games like Heretic, Hexen, Quake 4, Wolfenstein 2009, and many other very successful, very cool first-person shooters. They still make first-person shooters today, though since 2010, they have exclusively worked as backup on the Call of Duty series, working on every entry as an assistant to Affinity Ward, Treyarch, and Sledgehammer Games. And they were actually the primary developer on Modern Warfare Remastered. They've worked on a whole lot of very good games. This really shows, as the gameplay is very good. much like you might expect coming from the developers who had just released Soldier of Fortune a few months earlier. This game feels as good to play as any arena shooter released today, but with the slightly more realistic features of the Star Trek universe, like fall damage. There's all the traditional trappings of a post-Half-Life FPS, scripted sequences, the ability to save or kill civilians, and even reasonably competent squad mates. Frankly, I was surprised at the quality of everything in the game. There's even multiplayer, which is essentially Quake 3 Arena with some configuration changes, and frankly, the AI is better than anything Quake ever showed, but it's still quite bad by today's standards. Still, you can get Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, or Capture the Flag games going, and add bots to fill out the server if you can't find anyone online. The expansion even has a zombie-esque mode, where a single Borg has to kill several enemy players and assimilate them into the Borg, gradually shifting the play from a team of humans against one Borg to a team of Borgs against one human. I'd love to show it to you, but the expansion simply won't install anymore. Like, at all. The voice acting is quite good. All of the characters are voiced by their actors from the show, and none of them sound like they're intentionally phoning it in for a paycheck, which, if you've ever played these licensed games, tends to be the case. The only character not voiced by their actual actor is Jeri Ryan's 7 of 9, though she did voice the character in the expansion pack, I'm told. One of the more surprising things to me was that the game allows you to play as a female protagonist, fully voiced. Even Deus Ex cut that feature, and I'm not sure, but this might be the first fully voiced optional female protagonist in any FPS. Please, if you know of a game that did this before Elite Force, I'd really like to know. Additionally, the story is comprehensive and well done. It's a Star Trek story, but it's a really good Star Trek story. That means you can expect things to be telegraphed pretty early, and you probably know what's going to happen, but it's not too cheesy, and the various twists are pretty well done. One such twist is that the flying, annoying, screeching enemies that might just be my least favorite enemy in any game ever are not dying when you kill them. Instead, they are teleported into stasis and pulled back out again to fight later. When you look at the animations after hearing that, it's clear and obvious that's what's happening. And yet, since they are an alien race and you're shooting them with alien technology, you don't immediately make that assumption. It's a good job of tying things together, which again, you just don't typically see in a licensed game. It's funny because a lot of licensed games are designed to superficially provide a level of immersion into the piece of work. Movie tie-ins let you experience what it's like to be Superman or something along those lines, but this game instead sets its goal as letting you immerse yourself pretty fully into the world of Star Trek. The sounds are lifted straight from the show. There's loads of rendered cutscenes, though they look pretty abysmal today. This was a serious and not a rip-off attempt. And that's really, really great. The fact is that they added in a lot of things that they didn't need to, and this might be such a good FPS that it should be on the same level as Deus Ex, as Half-Life, because frankly, it takes a lot of cues from Half-Life, and rather than just spew out a half-assed Klingon killer, it's built a smart, well-written, story-based game with actual improvements on Half-Life. But as you might expect, this game did not sell particularly well. Again, it was up against Deus Ex and Metal Gear Solid, and it was a geeky Star Trek game. Something not particularly cool. There was a PS2 port done by Majesco, which is probably only really well known for the Blood Rain games, but by all accounts, the game itself was fine, though the PlayStation couldn't support the textures, so the graphics were a bit more compressed, not quite as good. On PC though, it was rated really well. 91% by GameSpy, 93% by PC Gamer, 5 stars on GamePro. IGN gave it an 8.6 back when they didn't rate everything an 11. It wasn't a poorly received game, it just didn't sell that well. And part of the reason seems to be the fact that it was considered to be pretty short. The whole game can be beaten in 5 to 7 hours, depending on how much you want to explore and how patient you are with cutscenes, not to mention how frequently you die or need to backtrack. While this is long compared to a Call of Duty, which tends to average out at 4 to 6 hours, a game like Deus Ex would take you 30 hours. Steam didn't exist yet. You had to buy games in a physical store, and if you're sitting there comparing Star Trek Voyager Elite Force against Deus Ex, well, one comes from the writer of Necrodome, and the other comes from Warren Spector working under John Romero at Ion Storm. It's not hard to see which one had the cachet, and beyond that, Star Trek has always hit people a little bit more nerdy than other fandoms. So it sold about a third of what it was anticipated to sell, but again, hugely critically acclaimed and frankly very good. Lots of fun. There was also a sequel, and it expands on the gameplay, it adds in a tricorder and more stuff. Elite Force 2 was done by Ritual Entertainment, who before this had really not done anything except some ports for Linux. Ritual is sort of famous now because a few years later they would release the Sin episodes and only release episode 1, never finishing the 9 titles they planned. And other than Sin episode 1 and a Blair Witch tie-in, this is their only full game. It was built on id Tech 3 as well, it builds on the work done for Elite Force 1, and it's fine. They tied in the Next Generation, and you get to hang out with Picard and see Starfleet Academy in San Francisco, and it's equally cool, but a lot less smooth, and somehow it feels cheaper. Where Elite Force 1 feels like a real labor of love, Elite Force 2 feels like a sequel. There's mini games and more weapons, and the game is longer, and there's collectibles and all the stuff. Just all the stuff. Unfortunately, it didn't sell well, and it didn't review well either. Not badly, but mostly in the 7 to 8 range, instead of the 9 to 10 range of the original. After this, Activision would lose the license to Star Trek, and that was it. Elite Force, as a franchise, was gone, and forever lost. And I really do mean that as well. You will never be able to purchase this game. Activision can't sell it anymore. It's been pulled from every store, and with the rights to Star Trek tied up through Paramount and Viacom CBS, there's no chance they agree to allow a company like GOG to sell it. In fact, it's kind of in a weird limbo, just like another game from this period that I covered called No One Lives Forever. It's just not something you can buy. And worse still, if you buy a physical copy, you're going to have to do a lot of work to get to play on a modern machine. There are fan sites and abandonware sites that have patches and guides on how to get the game to work, but it's not easy. It's likely that I will never get the expansion pack to work, for example. Just never. It's kind of sad. However, for one moment in time, there was a really good Star Trek game that could carry on the legacy of Half-Life, producing a Star Trek licensed video game that didn't suck for anyone. Trekkies could play something that took their hobby seriously and immersed them in the finer details of the world, and people who didn't know or care about Star Trek could play a thoroughly competent shooter in a well-written story with meticulous world building. Really, it was a win-win. Let me know what you think about Star Trek games down below. Have you played any of them? Maybe that mobile game that was popular for a while? I know I tried that one out briefly. If you want to watch that No One Lives Forever video, it's on the screen right now. And as always, we'll see you on the next one.